Yesterday, I was telling you about the process of writing and self-editing for self-publishing. If you haven't watched that video, I will link it in the description box below. Today, I will be telling you about what I learned from my editor. I eventually forwarded my script to an editor to be able to read and edit and basically do all the corrections so that we can reach a point where I can say that my script is ready to become a book. One of the main lessons that you will learn from an editor is how much you read. How much you read is usually interpreted in how much you write. It's equal to how much you watch movies, usually interprets to how creative you become. Usually there has to be something that teaches you to become better at what you are. And for me, how much I read was easily seen in how I was writing. My mistakes were simple mistakes, petty mistakes that could be avoided had I been more exposed to reading, had I learned how other authors are writing their grammars, how they're constructing their sentences, how they're using imagery. It would be very easy for me had I been reading more books than what I was reading at the time. So one of the main lessons I learned is just how much I read. An editor can easily tell how much you read by the way you write your script. Also, through how much you read, an editor can tell by the kind of spelling mistakes you make. If you make so many spelling mistakes, then the editor knows that you do not read, you do not do your research, you do not look at meanings of words. If you play things like Sudoku, it really does help in your reading style. If you do play word games, those things really do help with your spelling, with your connection with words. And it's very easy to tell if someone is really exposed to these things by the way they write. So that's another thing that I learned from my editor. There are two kinds of authors. There are those ones who beat around the bush and finally come to their point. Have you ever read a story? Let me give you an example. Check out these 3 sentences. They mean the same thing, but they've been written differently. We went through the forest, through 4 rivers, into the bush, and finally into my father's compound. We walked and walked and walked until we came to my father's compound. The journey was long, but we eventually came to my father's compound. So these 3 authors were almost meaning the same things, but you have to notice the first author may have wanted to give an imagery, to give you the idea that they went through difficulties to get to their father's compound. The second one was just being repetitive. You know, they walked and walked and walked. That could be used for emphasis, but also it could show lack of creativity in terms of where they were going. The third author, depending with what they wanted to say, went straight to the point. They went through so many difficulties, but eventually went into their father's compound. So the author is able to tell what kind of person you are. Are you the kind of person who beats around the bush, or are you the kind of person who will go straight to the point? And depending with the kind of tone you want for your book, these facts are important. The other thing that an editor can tell is if you're a lazy writer. A lazy writer is easy to identify. One of the mistakes they make is to leave questions lingering, like why did that happen, or who was that happening to, or when was this happening. If you read a story and you're left with these questions in the middle of the story, then that's not suspense. It's basically you not being given full information on the story that you needed to know. That is something that an editor is also able to point out when they're reading your story, and they're able to correct or advise on what you're supposed to write. The other thing that an editor can easily spot is whether you did your research. Again, are they able to answer why you are writing a story, who you are addressing, where this story was happening, when this story was happening, and how the events were unfolding? If they're not able to answer these questions, they know for sure that you did not do your research, or your research was not well done. For example, if you do write a book and a person of a specific specialty reads this book and some facts in the book do not make sense, then it's going to be bad on you as an author, of course, and also bad on the editor, because how did they miss this? For example, in the book The Budding Tree, the story has a lot of reference from the medical field. I couldn't imagine when a doctor reads my book and they find that some facts are wrong or some facts were not well covered. It was really important for me to do my research and be able to come with these facts. And that's what I mean by an editor can identify this. If they can't answer some questions in the book, or if they are confused about some facts, then they know for sure that you didn't do your research. And most of the editors will advise you to either do your research, or they will make these corrections for you, or they will ask you to omit the information from the book. Another thing that an editor can easily spot is how your story flows. For example, I'm headed to Mombasa. I have to pass through Mtito to go to Mombasa. It will never be I reached Mombasa then went to Mtito. There has to be a chronological order, which makes the story sound like it has a flow. So if your story does not have a flow, then the editor is able to tell that something is missing from the script. So these are some of the few lessons that I learned from my editor. As I go on, I will share with you more of this, and I hope that it will be educative to you as it has been to me. If you like this content, please give it a thumbs up. Also, subscribe.